A second failed attempt to evacuate a besieged Ukrainian city. 200,000 people were expected to leave Mariupol, but only a handful made it out before Russian forces broke the ceasefire.
We're told that so far only 3 families have managed to escape from that port city, dodging the shelling as they went.
Also ahead, fighting gets closer to Kyiv, with Russian troops just 15 miles from the city centre. The UN confirms 1.5 million civilians have now fled Ukraine, the fastest-growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. But here in Britain, the Home Office says so far only 50 applicants have been granted access through its Visa Family scheme.
Harrowing scenes in Ukraine as Russian forces step up their bombing of civilian areas. In Irpin, northwest of the capital, residents flee for their lives under relentless bombardment.
There's a fair amount of incoming fire coming into this now. Artillery fire, there are loads of civilians around.
A bridge used by civilians to flee the town has been targeted by the Russians, leaving many elderly especially vulnerable. In Poland, thousands more refugees have been arriving. So far, more than 1.5 million Ukrainians have fled their country. We'll be reporting on the plight of the refugee children suffering from cancer, whose treatments have been disrupted. And a second attempt to help civilians flee the southern city of Mariupol has failed.
Good evening. The people of Mariupol remain trapped in a city without power or water this evening, with Russian soldiers and the threat of shelling from every side. For a second day, attempts to let them leave failed as a ceasefire was broken within hours. Meanwhile, Russian forces are getting ever closer to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and as their advance continues, the number of Ukrainians racing out of the country has passed 1.5 million. Our first report comes from Romilly Weeks, who's in the city of Lviv.
Just half a mile from the outskirts of Kyiv, the aftermath of a Russian attack on a warehouse. But on the city's outskirts, people are the target too. In Irpin, a town under Russian bombardment, people are being shelled as they leave. It's residents trying to escape across this makeshift bridge. But this is a town where it's not safe to stay, and it's not safe to go. It's a story repeated in Mariupol. Over 400,000 people are under siege here. For a second day, they packed their bags because a humanitarian corridor was promised. For a second day, they returned to shelters when the Russians resumed firing instead. Ukrainian hopes tossed to the wind. No journey in this country is without pain. Lviv in the west is where those who do manage to escape are arriving. A confused, chaotic staging post for exhausted families, because this is the scene that greets them.
The UN is calling this the fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War, and this is what it looks like. Thousands upon thousands of people arriving here at the train station in Lviv, cradling their children, carrying their pets and their luggage. And as far as you can see, stretching down here, more people arriving, trying to leave. Many of them with just no idea where they will go. How old are your children?
3 and 1.5.
Vitaly has managed to escape from the ruins of Kharkiv under heavy Russian shelling.
You've been traveling for 22 hours?
Yeah, to Ternopil. And then here we like 5 hours from Ternopil to Lviv, because trains are moving very slowly, because there were many trains on the lines. Yeah.
And how are you managing with your children?
We have no choice.
As we're filming, this lady wants to tell me her story. She's had to leave her son behind in Kharkiv. We barely need a translator to understand her pain. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Lviv.
Well, let's talk more about that failed attempt to evacuate the citizens of Mariupol. Our correspondent Dan Rivers has travelled to this city of Zaporizhzhia, where the evacuees had hoped to arrive, but tonight the centre where they were due to stay remains largely empty.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, this used to be a circus in Zaporizhzhia. Now it is a reception centre for those displaced by the fighting. The Russians are only about 40 miles down the road. You can see they've got mattresses on the floor for when people arrive and they can get some sleep. So far, they've had about 250 people here who have been given clothes and food and medicine and so on, but they are expecting many, many more from Mariupol particularly. You can see here the people of Zaporizhzhia have been generously donating everything they can to help these people who've been forced to leave their homes and leave everything behind in most cases by the fighting. We understand that this convoy that was due to come out today, it's the second attempt, has now been cancelled, and I think they're going to try again tomorrow from Mariupol, but they are expecting thousands, probably tens of thousands of people here and in a couple of other reception centres like this. We're told that so far only 3 families have managed to escape from that port city, dodging the shelling as they went to get out and were processed here. But this really is going to become very busy once the enormous number of people escape. It's a city of 400,000 people that's been under shelling for many days now. And here at least they will have some respite. They'll have some food, some clothes, medicine before they can then be taken to safety.
Dan Rivers reporting there. Let's take a look at the situation on the ground on day 11 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is continuing its advance in the north and south of Ukraine, with several key cities surrounded, however, still under Ukrainian control. In the north, the Russians have opened up a new corridor as they advance on Kyiv, now from the east as well as the north. And in the south of the city of Mariupol remains under Ukrainian control, but is surrounded and under bombardment. Well, today's second ceasefire, as we've been hearing, lasted less than 3 hours before Ukrainian officials warned of further shelling. Our Europe editor James Mates is in the capital, Kyiv. And James, 11 days into the Russian advance, just how tough is the situation tonight?
Is every bit as bad as we feared it would get. Unable to take ground quickly, the Russians have turned to simply bombarding cities into rubble. And the 2 principal victims are Kharkiv in the northeast and Mariupol, of course, in the south. They won't even silence the guns long enough to let the people out. You know, when the Germans bombed Guernica or Coventry, they may have found it easier because their victims were Spanish or British, but both these cities are predominantly Russian-speaking. These are people who Putin himself said were fellow Russians, one people. He has been on the telephone today to France's President Macron. They spoke for almost 2 hours. Putin absolutely not backing down. He said he denied that he is targeting civilians and said that the denazification, as he calls it, will continue. France trying to keep a diplomatic route open, for which they must be given credit, but at the moment it's achieving absolutely nothing.
All right, James, as ever, thank you. Well, around 4,000 people have been detained at anti-war protests in Russia itself. The demonstrations took place in 53 cities, but human rights groups report that almost half of the arrests were in Moscow. Well, the world is now having to respond to the vast number of refugees fleeing the Ukraine. More than 1 million of those who have left have passed into Poland.